It's not that you don't get the job done. It's that you make such a mess in the process that you are causing us more trouble than you're worth. Hey, I'm Nick Fury. Even when I'm out, I'm still in. What's up, y'all? DT2 Comics Chat here. We're going to review Secret Invasion Episode 2, entitled Promises. Now, right off the bat, I know I can say what everybody was thinking, and that is that, why didn't you lead with this episode? Everything about this episode was not just better, but this should have been the first episode, and I'll tell you why. Had this been the first episode, we would have immediately engaged with the characters that we cared about. We would have immediately understood the stakes for the setup of the tension between everything that's going on. And introducing it the way they did, it was kind of confusing and we felt disconnected from it. But now we have the backstory that we needed. Always remember, and this is a little writing tip, if you're talking to an audience that you're assuming knows what's going on, that's one thing. But if you're writing it to bring in a new audience or some new viewers, or maybe sometimes it's safer to assume what we call a 0% baseline. That's an educational term, which means we assume that none of the students know anything. So we're going to start from scratch. Always a good idea, especially when you're doing something that's based on intrigue and mystery and shape-shifting, and because everybody here, these people and the Skrulls have long-standing relationships, but the viewers may or may not have long-standing relationships with the characters. So that's why it's always good to give them some kind of background, to give them some kind of context, which is what makes them care, and give them some idea of the stakes. That's just good basic storytelling. That's why this episode should have been the first one. Now, this episode starts with a flashback into 1995, and it uses the same font and size as Civil War, by the way. And so we see Fury first encountering Skrulls, and then we see his promise to them, which is the entire crux, the heart of the series. Fury promises that he and Carol Danvers will help the Skrulls find a new world. So if they work for him and take care of the stuff he cares about, Fury promises that he will, in return, give them a new world to inhabit. But what's significant about that is that they believe it. Fury issues them a challenge to trust them. They have to buy into it fully for that to happen, and they do. So once we see that happen in 1997 at the first meeting Fury has with the Skrulls, then we understand why this is such an emotional issue for them. We understand a lot better why there would be feelings of betrayal among them, because Fury still hasn't come through on his promises, and they've been working for him now for 25 years, and he and Carol Danvers still haven't delivered on what they promised. Now, I must say, it's a shame that there's not Carol Danvers in these episodes, because she keeps getting mentioned, and she made a joint promise, so maybe they're saying she's out there looking for the planet. I could buy that. But it sure would have a lot more impact if Carol Danvers, Brie Larson, actually showed up, but maybe she will. We'll see. Flash forward to the very ending of last episode, and we see the Moscow attack. We see Agent Hill die again in Fury's arms, and then Talos has to shapeshift to get Fury out of there because a lot of people were coming looking for everything that was going on. Then we have another incredible conversation between Fury and Talos on the train. So some soldiers come by looking for them, and Talos shapeshifts into a blonde woman, a Russian woman, who says, you know, you'd be more likely to find aliens than you would a black man in Moscow, which I thought was interesting. But then Fury does something completely ridiculous. After he comes out of the bathroom and Talos shapeshifts back to his regular form, his regular human form, and he says they're gone now, Fury leans against the train window and puts his face right up against the window. I'm like, did we or did we not just establish that you're being hunted? Why would you put your face right there on the window? That was very un-super spy-like to me. But anyway, they talk about their relationship, and Fury tells a story similar to the story he told in Captain America Winter Soldier about his time growing up, about how black people weren't allowed in certain parts of the train. So they would bring some fried chicken, some deviled eggs, some white bread in a box and eat that food. And that brought back a lot of memories of stuff my dad used to tell me about his day. And so it was just really, really interesting. But anyway, so they have kind of they play a game, tell me something I don't know about you, but it's really a doorway to a heart to heart. Now, I had a little trouble buying the revelations in this scene because basically Talos tells Fury that the original idea was that the Skrulls were scattered across the galaxy, everybody that wasn't back on the homeworld or back in captivity. But now Talos reveals that all 1 million Skrulls that survived the Kree attack, yeah, all of those Skrulls are on Earth with them. And Fury's like, what? Now, I have a hard time believing that in all this time, Fury's just now hearing that or just now figuring it out or whatever. And Talos was like, what would you have me do? What would you have done? Fury is smart enough to have assumed that all of the Skrulls would be there anyway, so I don't know why he didn't. You always hope for the best, but you're playing for the worst. And being a super spy, being the spy, he would think that way and he would know that. So I found that a little hard to believe that Fury didn't know that, or Talos was just now saying that, and there seems to be some tension between them after all this time. I'm saying Talos still seems to believe in the original mission. So I think they would have both come clean with each other long before then. But we're still a very powerful and intense scene. Then he reiterates the idea that Skrulls and humans ought to be able to share this planet. And Fury says we can't even share the planet with other humans. There's not enough room here for another species, but he just doesn't just mean numbers of people. Because on a planet of 8 billion, it's not that 1 million isn't significant, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the philosophy. He's talking about the ideology. Because people won't be able to accept sharing a planet with shape-shifting aliens. Because people would never be able to accept sharing a planet with shape-shifting aliens where you never know who is who. See, that's the same premise behind X-Men 2000, the first Bryan Singer X-Men movie, where Senator Kelly is having a hearing and Jean Grey and Professor X are there. And Senator Kelly is talking about all the things that mutants can do and how they can't be trusted. It would be the same idea on steroids, because how could you trust shape-shifting aliens? I'm gonna talk a little bit more about shape-shifting in a minute too, because there's a point that needs to be brought up. The next incredible scene we get is Maria Hill's funeral. And we see her mom there, and she confronts Fury. And every line she said was gold, because she was just shaking with rage, and she didn't want to be placated. She didn't want to be patronized. She didn't want to be condescended to. One more second, she wanted Fury to tell her the truth. And she could tell that Fury was still holding back. I mean, he said some things, but he obviously didn't say everything, and she knew that. But that last line she said was so powerful. She said, well, whatever the real reason is that my daughter died, don't let it be for nothing. I thought that was so powerful. I'm almost 97% sure Maria Hill's going to come back, because I can't imagine them getting rid of such a powerful and pivotal character. But once again, we get another scene that punctuates how others have believed in Fury and how just, besides themselves they are, that he has let them down. That's the theme of this episode, and it's punctuated again very strongly right here with Agent Hill's mom. I even love her line about how she would have followed you to the gates of hell. She would have followed you to the ends of the earth. And once again, somebody believing in Fury with all that they had. But I suppose you could call the major development of this episode, and Skrull Council meeting, and Goya can't go in. And so long story short, Gravik gets voted in as the new general, and all of the Skrull Council agrees to it, except 2 of them. And he basically says what the rebellious faction of Skrulls have been brewing on and stewing on and working on, and that is that he's tired of waiting on Fury's empty promises. And not only are they going to cohabitate on the Earth, they're going to take over, because Gravik says that he will take it by force. So they're not just going to be laying here doing nothing, okay? They're going to be actively taking over, which changes everything. It's a major shift in tone and tension, where we get a face and a focus for the little civil war that's happening inside of the Skrull. The Skrulls that still believe Fury and Danvers, and the Skrulls that are tired of all that are taking matters into their own hands, and that are making sure that they cause World War III by the Moscow attack, by making sure the United States and Russia and anybody else that can get riled up, that the humans begin to destroy each other, which will make taking over the planet all that much more easy. Less resources you have to spend if the humans are destroying themselves. You just have to stay alive, stay out of sight, and then they can pick up the spoils much easier than if they, were trying to do a frontal assault with 1 million Skrulls, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Now, there's a few things I have to throw in right here. The first thing I want to throw in is I don't know why they cast Emilia Clarke in the role of Gaia. Every time she comes on the screen, everything just slows to a halt. Everything just falls flat. I don't even understand, again, what she's doing there, but so far she seems very flat in this role. That's the first thing. The second thing I want to talk about is the idea of shape-shifting. Very, very important, and I don't think they've made enough of a distinction about it. Like Mystique, Chameleon Boy in the comics, people with the power to shapeshift. Okay, what exactly is going on? Are they imitating a form or are they becoming that form? Those are two different things. So if you're creating a mirage, an illusion, where you're just putting on something on the surface where you look like something, but you're still you underneath, that's kind of like the T-1000 in the Terminators, because he's still the liquid metal. He's just, assuming a different form, as opposed to imitating or becoming that form. That means you have all the abilities and the powers, the capabilities thereof. If you become that, that's different. And the reason I bring that up is because, I don't know, it could just be me, but the Skrulls seem like they're dispatched too easily. Now, I must admit, it's my bias because of Martians. Martians in DC have complete molecular control. So they can phase, they can do a whole bunch of things. If all the Skrulls are doing is imitating other forms, but they still die like we do, which brings me to my next point I want to talk about, and that's the fact that they use the same weapons that we do. That really kind of gets on my nerves. You mean to tell me that you're a spacefaring race, that you fought the Kree until you couldn't fight them anymore? Okay, and you got here and all you're doing is using, Glocks and knives and bombs like we do? Seems like to me they ought to be able to do more. And I know they can in terms of the technology they're using to assume human form, but maybe they don't want to tip people off that they're Skrulls, so they use human weapons. I can get that. But there have to be some weapons that they can use to, for example, disintegrate that wouldn't leave a trace or something. I don't know. It feels kind of weak to me. But I'm spoiled by Green Martians in DC. The Skrulls ought to be able to do more. I'm sure they will before the series is over, but just kind of something I wish we could see now. We get a brief glimpse at New Skrullos of their scientists trying to create something, but they need something called the New Harvest. And so they've been unable to find it, but they're looking for it. And there's a lot of stuff going on there. I'm going to mention that at the end when I talk about the Easter eggs in this episode. Then we get to such a powerful and intense scene until you have to play it over and over and over again, because Rhodey and Nick Fury are talking to each other on many different levels. They're talking to each other as authorized agents of the government. They're talking to each other as superheroes or part of a superhero team. They're talking to each other as black men in America. And their conversation touches all of those areas. Really, really well directed and really, really well acted. Basically, Rhodey fires Fury. He tells them that, he says the same thing to Fury that General Ross has been saying, and that is that it's not that you don't get the job done, it's that you make such a mess in the process that you are causing us more trouble than you're worth. Fury tries to say that the whole reason he was in Moscow was to prevent the attack, and Rhodey was like, good job on that, because you didn't. The attack still happened, and now there's a whole bunch of mess, or a whole steaming pile of caca, as Rhodey says, that they have to clean up. And it's Fury's messiness and also his kind of blasé attitude that's really getting on Rhodey's nerves. But let me say here, I don't know why people don't understand that Rhodey is a company man. You understand what I mean by that? Rhodey is a company man. He thinks that way. He's been that way. He was that voice in Civil War. Okay, so Rhodey is an establishment dude. He's always going to respond that way. And so they also have a wink here, a nod here, a name drop to Alexander Pierce. And then they're talking as black men about how, every ounce of power that we have isn't given to us because we have rich grandfathers. We have to wrestle it from men like Pierce, which was an incredible line. I mean, there's just so much history in that line, and they talk about that history. But Rhodey counters by saying, that's right, we weren't wrestling power from petty men like that to give it to petty men that look like us, calling Fury out to his face. So, I mean, the back and forth between them was really intense. You could tell Rhodey's disgust, but I was disgusted at how much of a sellout Rhodey is to the establishment. But Fury keeps responding like the maverick that he is. I'm Nick Fury. You're like, hey, whatever it takes to get the job done. And then he gives probably the best line of the episode. Rhodey tells him there's a car outside. The guard tries to manhandle Fury and he breaks his arm and takes his gun. And then he gets right in Rhodey's face and says, hey, I'm Nick Fury. Even when I'm out, I'm still in. Ha! That was great. That line was absolutely great. And then he kind of pimps on out. When he's outside, he kind of sits down and puts his head in his hands and has a little bit of a breakdown. But he still left the scene as cool as always, but it gives you a clear sense, because if you notice, there are clear themes of division. This is like a next level from Winter Soldier, from when Hydra was splintering S.H.I.E.L.D. It's totally next level because you got factions of the government that are upset with each other that aren't talking. You got factions of the Skrulls that are upset and aren't talking, and then you have the whole Skrull human conflict. So they're playing the game on multiple levels, which is why, again, I say this episode should have been first, sets the stage and shows the stakes way better. However, what I must also say is that every time we see something that's kind of Skrull only, it kind of also slows down the motion for me, because they're telling this story not only from Fury's point of view, but mainly from the Skrulls' point of view. And I'm like, I'm not rooting for the Skrulls. I understand that they got issues, and I understand that they've been displaced, and I understand even that Fury made promises. But I'm not rooting for the Skrulls, okay? I'm rooting for the heroes. And if you have Nick Fury in something, I mean, that's why I'm so glad they had the scene with Rhodey. But I know this is a smaller budget, and I know Fury addressed it in that scene, that they can't bring the Avengers in because then the Skrulls will just imitate them and have them causing all kinds of problems. But the Skrulls could do that now. They could do that anytime they got ready. They did it with Fury and Shooting Hill, didn't they? So they could do that now if they wanted to. That would probably escalate the world war faster. Or if one of the Skrulls pretended to be Ultron come back to life, that's another really quick way to get everybody at each other's throats and get a lot of destruction going if that's what they wanted to do. But every time we see the Skrull only stuff, I just don't care as much. I want to see more of Fury. I want to see, we keep talking about Carol Danvers, at least we saw Rhodey, but there's not necessarily a lot of superhero action. And again, I understand budgetary concerns, but that's still what I want to see. That's still what's more interesting to me than all of the intrigue that the Skrulls have within their own race in terms of what they believe and what they're doing to accomplish their goals. Just not as, it's interesting, but just not as interesting to me. So Sonya tortures a Skrull. She goes back in the meat locker and she's got some kind of liquid. She said when she goes in, I'm above your pay grade. And she basically boils his blood until he talks. That was deep. That was so intense. She's a real player in this game, and she's got that kind of snarky, witty attitude, but for her it works. Her comebacks, her snark, her snappy banter, and her wit works for the character. Everybody's not supposed to talk like that, but for the characters that do talk like that, and when it works for their vibe and their energy and their role in the story, it's great. And Sonya so far is great. If she's gonna die, I hope she dies later rather than sooner, because I definitely would like to see some more adventures with her. So the big deal there is about the machine that they're building and how they think it would make the Skrulls stronger. So again, just a few minutes, I'm gonna talk about that when I talk about the Easter eggs. But most of the Skrull behind the scenes this episode was about the technology that they're using to try to get that next level going for their race. So then we have the big reveal, and the big reveal is that Nick Fury's wife is a Skrull. So he comes in and she's like, aren't you forgetting something? And he puts on his wedding ring and they make out, fade to credits. And so more questions are begged. Does he know? Well, of course he knows, but whose side is she on? Is she a part of the Skrulls that still believe in the promise, that are waiting for them to find the new world? Is she a part of the faction that's taking matters in their own hands and plan to take over the earth? Is she a plant for S.H.I.E.L.D. or the government. Like, what exactly is she doing there? So that's going to be interesting. I can almost predict that when these grits hit the pan, when Fury and his wife confront each other, he's going to say, I knew all the time. And he's going to be talking about how he was always 10 steps ahead of her. And he might just kill her and say, sorry, I had to do that or something. But I just feel like when this comes to a head, it's going to be more funny than tragic. I could be wrong, but it'll be fun to see. So let's right quick talk about the Easter eggs that were dropped here, like Emperor Drogue or Emperor Drogue's colony. That's not directly from the comics, but there is a Skrull character named Drogue Fenno Edu, who was basically the science minister, which feeds into the heart of what the Skrulls were doing, and that is that they are basically trying to make Super Skrull, okay? In the comics, they took the Fantastic Four's DNA and used that, but here they're using DNA from Groot, from one of the Frost Beasts, from Obsidian, that's Lieutenant Black Dwarf, called Obsidian from Infinity War, one of Thanos' lieutenants, and the extremist tech from Iron Man 3 that Tony Stark created. So they're trying to harvest all these different cell samples and all this DNA to integrate it into their systems to give themselves these individual powers. That's going to be huge when they pull that off, because they will. You know they're going to be able to pull all that off, or else they wouldn't be doing it. So that's fascinating. I can't wait to see how that plays out. They may even introduce the Fantastic Four, but I'm just reaching for that one. Okay, there's a Fox News talking it, kind of FXN News, but they're talking about they're using the media for their broadcast purposes or whatever. But the McDonald character, Kristen McDonald, is also part of the Secret Skrull Council. So, you know, there's a story reason for that. They talk about how they, the way they elect a new general is very common for the way Skrulls do things. That's actually from the comics. And then obviously we already talked about Alexander Pierce. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this episode that is fun, much more fun than the first episode, and kind of, there's a lot of setups. After this episode, we see the stakes, we see the players a lot better, we see their attitudes, but there's a lot of setups. So now, since this is only a limited series, what has to happen in the next episodes is all of these things that have been set up have to pay off. The Skrulls trying to harvest DNA to give themselves powers. Fury's wife being a Skrull and what that means for their relationship and whose side she's on. Mentioning all the name drops from the rest of the MCU as a way to show how this is going to affect the entire MCU going forward. Whether or not, how far the Skrulls get with their domination and takeover of the planet. If we're going to see more heroes, just so many different things. So many different things. I really hope they give Emilia Clarke's character Gaia something to do, because she's just born now. But everything else, now, I won't say I'm fully invested, but I'm much more invested, because now I want to see how this stuff plays out. All right? And let me know what you think about this episode. I definitely want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, share this video, and ring the bell so you know when I drop new videos. And I definitely want to dialogue with you about how this is developing, because I want to hear your theories. So let me hear from you in the comment box below. That's it for this episode, and I will see you on the next episode of Secret Invasion. Y'all thought I was going to fade into a Skrull, didn't you? I know you did.